Honestly, the take-home message for me of the book was that time is your biggest commodity.
Mhm.
You know, that time is your most precious resource, and you figure out what you're going to do with it. So, you know, outsourcing, like Tim's big thing back then was outsourcing like anything that you didn't want to have to do, and really trying to figure out, like, is this going to be worth my time? Putting, you know, something on the website, see if somebody is going to buy it or not. You know, is this going to be worth my time writing a book about this or not? You know, and all that was really very helpful, because it really got people to shift in thinking, you know, instead of bigger, better, faster, more, instead of just accumulating a lot of stuff, you know, you were instead accumulating experiences and really putting your energy into building a richer life as opposed to more materialistic things. And I think that's where kind of my connection with Tim came in, because we have really lived our lives kind of based around traveling, but we're professional people. My husband's an engineer, I'm a psychologist. And so, you know, we're professional people, but yet travel has always been our passion. And so most of our energy, our resources, et cetera, outside of the professional realm are really put into making sure that we get all those travel experiences. I wrote a couple of articles for Abroad, a magazine abroad back then.
Okay.
And he had advertised in it, has anybody done any long-term travel? And if so, do you want to talk to me about it? And so I contacted him and said, hey, you know, we just finished this year-long trip in South America. I'm happy to talk to you some more about it. And so then he and I chatted on the phone. And that's how we hooked up. And then I was in the process of writing a book about our trip, which is BYOC, Bring Your Own Children South America, to really encourage families to bring kids and do that kind of long-term travel. And so we had a lot of contact about why we were prioritizing travel over, you know, the usual, you know, hanging out at home with the kids and getting the kids involved in the usual, you know, sports and everything else that you normally do when you're an American, you know, with raising kids, right? So it's just a different way of thinking about what can broaden their experiences. Oh, absolutely. And so we have one child, Christopher, and you know, that's another thing. Oh, well, you only have one. That's just another way. But you know, the bottom line is, if you're passionate about it, you can really figure out a way to do it. And now with the internet, it's so much more easy to do that than it was back then, which is why I wrote the book, because I really didn't know a lot of other people that were traveling with kids long term like we were. And I want to encourage people to do it and show the benefits of it and how wonderful it could be. In fact, 5 years later, we took another year off with Christopher and traveled around Africa. And boy, my parents were very freaked out about that. My mom was like, oh, do you want to leave him at home with us? And I was like, well, no, that's the whole point, is that we want to do this together collectively as a family and build those relationships and have those experiences that you normally, when you get busy, you know, kids normally in school, obviously not now, but, you know, normally in school and parents working and everybody's going a million different directions, you don't have that opportunity to be super close like we were on the road for a year, you know, and relying on each other for our own entertainment, which is huge. So besides what's going on around us. So, yeah, so that I just kept encouraging people, you can do it, you can do it. And now there are a lot more bloggers, a lot more websites, a lot more families that do short and long-term travel with their kids. So it's a lot easier to have those examples of ways that you can make it work with one kid or with 5 kids. You know, what's interesting is the internet, I think, is a double-edged sword, because not only has it made things easier, but it also has made people more afraid, because they see things a lot on Facebook, online, over and over. They're just bombarded with these images. And so in some ways, they can even use some of those things now as excuses. Oh my God, I saw this on the internet. I saw that on the internet.
Right.
And we know that a lot of times those titles are really manipulated. So to try to engender fear or interest or something, so people click on it and look at it. So in all honesty, I think I continue to go back to, it's not a change, it's just a reiteration. Like I just reiterate, really do your research, you know, find out how accurate that information is from a variety of sources, and especially check with the locals. For example, we took a trip a handful of years ago to Tunisia, which unfortunately has had quite a bit of terrorism. And before we even went, we contacted an Airbnb host there, and through that medium could say, you know, we're going to be traveling alone. We're going to be going on public transportation. Are these things even going to be possible? And so we could at least flesh out a little something about our trip and feel comfortable at least going and trying to do some of the things we wanted to do. So, so I would say my advice would just be more do your research, but really dig, you know, find people there that you can talk to directly or communicate with directly, and really go to the sources, because the headlines that you're going to see are may or may not even be accurate. No, absolutely. I'm a clinical psychologist. I
Okay.
went to graduate school. I have my PhD. I then went into started working for the school. So I actually had to go back and take some classes to get a master's level school psychology certification. So and honestly, that's one of my biggest things that I'd encourage younger people to do. Like, there's a lot of buzz about get rich quick on the internet. Start a blog. It's amazing, you know. And really, how my husband and I made our money is through being able to have professional careers. So yes, I worked for 20 years in the school system, maybe even more. And what we developed, and my husband ended up being one of three owners of an engineering company.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved to Portland with an internship where I was making $800 a month and he had no job at all. And we figured out a way to work hard and prioritize travel at the same time and always live within our means. And that was another big thing, was always living within our means. So we developed a system where we'd work for 5 years and then we'd take a year off. And then we'd work for 5 years and we'd take another year off. And then after that second time, we worked for 5 years. We kind of tested the waters there, and then worked for 5 years. And then my son was going to college. Our son was going to college, and we were ready to take the full-on leap. So we sold everything in 2014, and we've just been traveling since then. We've literally been on the road. We stopped and worked for a handful of months in 2016, but other than that, we've just been living out of the backpack. And the thing was, by that point, we had accumulated the kinds of things that you normally accumulate in the States. We had property, you know, again, my husband was part owner of his business. We were very conscious about putting money into retirement and maxed out as much retirement plans as we possibly could, put lots of money aside for Christopher's college, et cetera, and just continued to kind of focus on that. And so that's how we ended up being able to finally take the leap. Was we got to the point after coming back that second time after 5 years, and we looked at our bank account. We met with a couple different financial advisors, and we were like, can we really do this? And they were like, yeah. And we said, okay, we're going to sell everything. So it took that long to sell everything, to sell the property, for Fran to figure out how to sell the shares of the business. You know, it's a long process, but we were definitely committed by that point. And I would say one of the biggest things that I would encourage people to do, actually two. One is try the mini retirement before you do it full time. Like, make sure you like it. Make sure you can tolerate each other for a year. You're going to be your own best friends. That's it. And number two, I would also encourage people to think about it's not permanent. That hamster wheel is always there. You can always jump right back on that working hamster wheel, which is what we did in 2016. We came back to the States. My husband's business said, hey, we need somebody for a few months. I found a job immediately as a school psychologist. So we lived in Southern Oregon. And before we knew it, you know, we were back. Fran was working all the time. He was going out of town. I was doing my thing. I was, you know, working from 7 in the morning until 5 at night, and then going to the gym, coming home. And, you know, again, it was like that hamster wheel was right there. So after 6 months of that, we were like, okay, this is not. So it's there. You can do it. Like you can make the leap. And if you find for whatever reason circumstances change, or frankly, it's not what you were looking for, you can always course correct. Big thing is learn about finances early. Educate yourself about every ins and outs of finances you can. Fran and I came into it probably actually in our 30s when we were starting to think about college for Christopher, and found a financial advisor at first, and you know, through our own process realized that he wasn't the person for us. But you know, now this isn't a plug for Schwab, but we mostly go through Schwab, and we have control of our own finances. They have an amazing travel checking account that's feeless. And so that really helps with no foreign transaction fees. So I wish I had done that research back when I was just starting out in early 20s, because we're all playing the game. We're all in this game of life. And we need to know the rules. And a lot of people don't know the rules. A lot of people make really bad financial decisions just because they don't know. You know, they're not familiar with the terminology, or they just don't know. So if I were to do it over again, and certainly what I would encourage other 20-year-olds, you know, to do is learn immediately. And colleges should be doing that. They're not yet, but they should be, you know, giving people a financial course where you have to learn about retirement accounts and what does it mean to take out a student loan, and you know, all those kinds of things. So that's my biggest advice. Susie Orman.
Okay, all right.
And Charles Schwab wrote a book too. I read his as well. But yeah, it was back in the day. You know, I love Oprah. And she had Susie Orman on there, and then Susie Orman did a spin-off show, and it's hilarious because I would watch that show all the time. And now that our son is 25, and we are doing our best to give him as much financial advice as we can. He's in computer science, and he's actually making money, and he actually has a 401k, which is something we never even had. So like we're doing our best to try to educate him. And the funny thing is, every so often he'll say something like, I need to have that 8%. Because Susie told us, he's like, he kept overhearing it in the background when I was watching it. And he's like, I remember what Susie had to say. I learned something from all those shows, Mom. What I'm trying to say is you should have a certain amount of money set aside for an emergency fund.
Okay.
And I believe it was 8%, 8 to 10% you should always be setting aside for your emergency fund. And so that's what I'm trying to say. So sorry about that. I have to say that the books that influenced, and honestly the TV shows that influenced me the most, I'm going to do a little tribute to Anthony Bourdain here. Because he, by far, I still have quotes on my phone from him. that I absolutely love. And for example, one of the things he says is, oh, every time I get kind of fed up with this, I'm kind of think I may be done with traveling, then something interesting happens. So it's always interesting and it's always challenging in a good way. And I think that totally sums it up, because when you're on the road all the time, it can feel like, oh my gosh, maybe we just need to settle down. Maybe we just need to do something, it can look like, being in a place for an extended period of time, which we have the luxury of doing. But you kind of see people have their houses and their routines, and you're like, oh, predictable laundry. That would be so nice. Predictable pillow would be so nice.
Yeah.
Shower regularly. So nice. And then something interesting happens. So, I find that I tend to go towards blogs of people that are actually on the road doing what we're doing, because a lot of bloggers that I started following have all settled down. And now they're either selling their tours, or they're in one place and writing about where they are. They've changed. So, for example, Wandering Earl is one of the people that I follow really regularly, because he's been on the road for 20 years and he's doing what we're doing, like sorting it out as he goes. So yeah, Wandering Earl. And he puts out a newsletter every week. And we got, this is a bit of a tangent, and I don't know if you want to talk about it at any point, but we got stuck on Easter Island and had to be repatriated back to the United States because of COVID.
Okay.
And he got stuck in Bali. And so I've been kind of watching what he's doing over there, and he's American. But he had set up the ability to live in Spain. And so I've been really watching, like, okay, how's this going to play out for him? And he came back to the States and it was too expensive, and he went down to Mexico. So it's been really interesting to follow him. So I would say those are the people that I'm really following now, is like, how are they doing what I'm doing? And especially with all the COVID stuff, it's what is opening up and what are people's experiences. And I have a friend right now who just went over to Turkey because it's open to America. So, he and I are going back and forth, what's it like over there? How's it,
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I'm doing now. It's like kind of on the ground, like what's happening, sussing out what to do next. Night and day. Because like I said, we were on Easter Island, flew over there, everything was open, the entire continent, and 2 days later they shut down the entire continent and stopped all the flights, and we were stuck. And we were there for 2 weeks before we finally ended up getting back to the States, and it took government intervention to get us back. So it was quite dramatic. We were supposed to go over to Australia and had a whole year planned of Australia and Coral Triangle, and volunteering with some friends who are in Philippines. So it dramatically changed. All that stuff is done. And for the first time, we had quite a few flights set up, because a lot of those countries will only let you in if you have a flight onward. And so once we got back to the States, because we had no other choice, we could either stay on Easter Island, and when COVID hit the island, we knew that they were not equipped to handle COVID at all. So that was frightening. And so we had either stay there and potentially get sick and not be able to be treated, or come back to the States. Those were our two choices. So we came back to the States. And so we have a friend who had a place in Indianapolis. We stayed in Indianapolis for 4 months, and then finally just said, oh my gosh, we have to do something different, and realized that it's really based on your behavior, how safe you're going to be. So we are in Florida, epicenter, da da da, you know, but we have done what we need to do to protect ourselves. And so we have been spending the last couple of months in Florida. We're going to go to New Orleans, go back home to Indianapolis, where our son lives, in Cincinnati for the holidays, and then try to figure out what abroad, you know, what countries will take us next year. But basically, we had this whole year set up that we were not going to be in the States. We had all of our stuff set up to travel elsewhere, had the belongings, like even purchased extra stuff for stinger suits and whatnot
Oh,
for
wow.
Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah. Really good question. I actually, when I came back, I'd been looking into, we do yoga. I'm
Hmm.
a really avid yogi. And so when I came back, I found an online yoga school and I got my
Oh,
200
wow.
hour yoga certification.
Great.
And that's what like saved me for the first couple of months. And I also have a school in Terre Haute called Common Ground, where a studio where they started putting their classes online because of the pandemic. And so that's like a whole community that I was able to hook into. And they had all their classes, you know, live over Zoom so that we could chat with each other and kind of check in on how we were doing, and like this really wonderful community. And
Hmm.
so that whole thing really dramatically helped the transition, the isolation, and just the feeling of, you know, wow, I have had to give up on all these travel plans that I don't know how it's going to work in the future, because those, you know, those island nations are it's really difficult for them with the pandemic. It's not an easy
Right.
situation for those guys.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so that was huge. So that's a big thing. And then once that ended, I guess I had about a month before I was like, okay, we got to go do something else. So we bought a car.
Oh, okay.
Bought a 2005 Camry just to get us down here to Florida. And yeah, decided, well, we know how to behave in the pandemic. We know how to keep ourselves safe. So this is what we're going to do to try to fulfill the travel bug and stay safe at the same time and not expose anybody else. It was really interesting because Christopher was 7, so he was still quite young. And one of the things we discovered early on was that he really loves wildlife and animals. And
Mhm.
so that dramatically changed our emphasis on that in that trip. For example, like we got vaccinations to go into the rainforest, and we got malarial tablets, et cetera, but we weren't sure we were even going to use it.
Mhm.
And the doctor said, "Are you guys going to go to the rainforest?" And we're like, "Well, we don't know. It might not be safe." And he's like, "Oh, you should go." When we got down there and we realized how much Christopher loved the animals and had the opportunity, we had a friend in Ecuador, Alfonso, take us to the rainforest, and we found out we loved it. And
Mhm.
so from that point on, we really focused a lot of our travels on seeing wildlife and learning about the wildlife. We volunteered with an organization in the rainforest called Inti Wariasi, Comunidad Inti Wariasi in Bolivia. And we spent 2 weeks rehabilitating animals there. We went to the Galapagos just because of Christopher's love, even though it was a super expensive trip and we weren't planning on it. But
Mhm.
everybody just said, you know, if he loves animals that much, you really need to do it. So we're like, okay, well, we'll do it. And we were thrilled that we did it.
Mhm.
So that was a big thing that we learned, was to really appreciate and support each other's interests, and then, you know, that would become an interest of our own.
Mhm.
And also really enjoyed learning about each other's strengths and weaknesses, like especially the strengths. Like my husband loves to carry heavy things and he is very steady and calm, you know, and when I'm flipping out, he is always just like mellow. Really balances out, you know, whereas I'm much more of like the planner and the doer and the get things done and make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, you
Mhm.
know. So we really learned a lot about each other's strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes it's irritating and you just learn, can I deal with this long term in this kind of a situation? Which is what I like. I'm at the stage where a lot, unfortunately, of our friends are starting to get divorced. They're empty nesters. You know, dynamics change dramatically. And it's like, can we put up with each other? Well, when you're together as much as we have and know every little detail of your habits, physical and otherwise, then, you know, you really know how compatible you are, and can appreciate that. So. And slow travel is the other thing over the years that we've just developed more and more, because the stress of getting from point A to point B, especially with kids, that's the hard part. And the enjoyable part, and you know, yeah, it's part of the journey, okay. But the enjoyable part, in my opinion, is to get somewhere and really sink in and be a part of that community. Get to know the people, know their story. You know, that's something I'd love to get some more information, because back then I was more focused on Christopher and seeing things. And now it's more, what is the story that the people are telling me about their culture and about their influences, and how can that inform what we do and how we all move forward? You know, what's the backstory here? And that, I think, is what I really choose to focus more on now than I did back then, which was more, how do you keep a 7-year-old interested, and you know, that type of thing, which you have to do. But we would do like, okay, what's the one thing we want to accomplish today? And then everything else is icing on the cake. There's one place we want to try to go today, and everything else is good. Or we're trying to get from here to there today. Everything else, you know, is secondary. You know, that's a win if you get the one thing. So, and that's what I would highly like. You just have to do things slower and sink into places more and get to know the people and their stories. I recently, I maintain a website, and I recently wrote a yoga post about our time in Varanasi. And I realized so many people, I was Googling around, and I realized so many people go and see this morning prayer. And I was like, well, what is the morning prayer? I mean, obviously, it's a huge part of their culture. They do it every morning. Everybody goes. Like, what is it? What is it? Almost nobody mentions what the heck the morning prayer is. And I realized, like, that's a problem. And I'm like, and why didn't we find out more about the morning prayer? Like, I wish that I had taken advantage of the guy who brought us there and asked him more, like, why is this important? How does this fit into your culture? What is, you know, and I know now that it's through my yoga 200-hour training, I know that it's because of the Ayurvedic and the 5 elements and all those. There's a lot that goes into it. And I really am disappointed that I missed the opportunity to find that out more when I was there. I think the two biggest ones is money and fear, you know, and it's usually fear like terrorism now has rated highly, or illness. And with COVID, I wonder, you know, how much that's going to now pervade the, oh my God, you don't want to get sick abroad. And you know what? That's a consideration. It obviously was a consideration for us on Easter Island, or we would still be there, you know, but we just didn't want, you know, we were like, we know there's, you know, not the opportunity to get help if we're here. Plus, they weren't very happy about having us there. You know, they're going to help the locals first, which makes sense. And then they've got all of these, you know, extra heroes that are there. So I can't say that I can't say that anything, you know, unusual or weird. It's all just theme and variation on the same kinds of concerns. But again, COVID, terrorism, it's all the fires that are stoked, you know, from incidents that happen around the world. I'm so going to use a Game of Thrones reference in this one because
Okay.
it's so perfect. You know, Arya, she's just such a great heroine in so many different ways, especially because she's such a different representation of like the power of womanhood. And at the very end, when she goes, "What's west of Westeros?" and whoever she was talking to says, "I don't know," and she goes, "Nobody knows. The map ends there. That's where I'm going." And it's like perfect. It's like that's what motivates me. You know, like nobody knows. Like it's the excitement of discovery. It really is the excitement of discovery. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I applaud the early explorers. I've gotten so much more into, especially we took a trip, we were lucky to go to Antarctica before all this came about.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories of the explorers of Antarctica are just incredible. I don't know if in fact, I'm just going to say, I don't think that I have that level of risk taking. That takes a certain person, maybe even like a certain amount of mania, you know. You
Yeah, I
have to
remember it
be
was like
mad.
someone like Shackleton. Does that ring a bell? Like
Oh
one of the
yes.
early, yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, Shackleton, absolutely. Like the things that they did and going into the unknown and being able, and Shackleton rescued all his men and brought them back.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but then, see, here's another thing about the stories people tell. Then you go to Chile and you discover that that Pardo, there's Pilot Pardo, who nobody's ever heard. He's not mentioned in anything. And he was the one that Shackleton recruited to finally go down and rescue his men. And
Mm.
he was using a boat that totally wasn't prepared to rescue the men. He was using maps that were 100 years old. He was like, "I'm coming back with the men, or I'm not coming back at all." He was the true hero. Like
Mm.
that's the kind of story that I love, you know, is these people who the people who make it all work, you know, not just the big, you know, Instagram figures. It's who's in the background, who's doing this stuff. And so that's the kind of stuff that I love. And that's the kind of excitement that I have. Again, you know, it's not just the, okay, you're in a place, but especially as a psychologist, you know, for me, it's the journey of discovery. And some of that discovery is, what is so interesting about the way these people live? You know, why are the Chileans protesting? What are they so unhappy about right now? You know, all of those kinds of things. That's the stuff that I really enjoy. And that's what gives me motivation to tell their story and to encourage people to go, you know, encourage tourism. And
Mm-hmm.
I've really moved away from that, you know, oh, let's just tell people to go to Italy again, you know, the big heavy hitters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying to encourage people to go to places like Tunisia, like Ukraine, like, you know, these places that could really use the tourist dollars when it's safe again
Mm-hmm.
and benefit from them in a positive way, as opposed to Barcelona that's just so overwhelmed with tourists, they don't want tourists anymore.
Right.
You know, and what's going to make people interested in that, I think, is the stories. You know, what
Mm-hmm.
is it about Ukraine that you can find out, and what is cool about it and different? And that's the stuff that motivates me.